Dr. William Keepin, a PhD in mathematical physics, environmental scientist and practitioner on the contemplative path of divine love for 35 years. He founded the Satyana Institute and Gender Reconciliation International with his wife, Cynthia Brix. Together they conduct a valuable ministry of healing for women, including trainings, retreats, and workshops, nationally and internationally, encouraging individuals, communities, and organizations to combine the inner work of the heart with outer service to the world. And he's a grandpa, so I think many of us can identify with that. Dr. Keepin.
Thank you, Greg. It's a great honor to be here this afternoon at the World Summit, and I want to share some ideas with you about how science and spirituality can be united. So, let's see, what happened to my slides? Okay, my slides are not, maybe I can get some help here. The slides are not on. So in 1990, I heard a talk from the Dalai Lama, and this is what he said. If you want to study, if you want to know the deepest secrets of the universe, there are 4 steps. First, study or explore the outer visible universe. Second, explore the inner realms, the invisible universe. Third, explore the relationship between the two. And then from these 3, you can come to know the deepest secrets of the universe. So, maybe I'll just say that this first one is essentially the realm of science. This is the realm of religion and spirituality. And then this is the whole relationship between science and spirituality, if you will. So going to religion for a moment. I'm having trouble with my, okay, here we go. This is a comparative course in comparative religion in 30 seconds. That across the religions, the basic assertion is that there is a supreme other, which goes by different names, which is far greater than ourselves. And the practice is that we take refuge in this great other, regardless of what we call it, God, Allah, Dharma, Dharmakaya. It goes by different names, but this is the process that's universal, even in the theistic as well as the non-theistic traditions. We take refuge in this other. Now, what is God? So here are some cutesy little acronyms for you. I encourage you to just go with this presentation with whatever understanding of God that you have. And if you're a Buddhist, you know, the grand omnipotent Dharmakaya for non-theistic, because we need a label for that realm. And if you are a committed atheist, and you believe that it's all caused by random chance, then this GOD can refer to the generalized operating dice that's rolled and creates, you know, the random process. But however you conceive of God, okay. What the religions proclaim across the religions is that ultimately we are one with this other. This is our ultimate identity. So for example, in the Upanishads, we have the 4 Mahavakyas. This is one of them. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. These are the assertions of the great mystics of the Hindu tradition. Then we find, of course, the same thing in Christianity. And Jesus not only says, I and the Father are one. In John's Gospel, he also says, in dialogue with God, everything I have is yours. Everything you have is mine. Very important, because Meister Eckhart later explains that, and Meister Eckhart says, I basically experience all of God's divinity, all of God's beauty, all of God's infinity in the depths of my own heart. And then in the other traditions, Al-Hallaj, who proclaimed An al-Haq, I am the supreme reality, for which he got the same treatment Jesus did. He was executed in Baghdad. And, of course, in the Psalms, be still and know that I am God. So there is this identity with God across the traditions. The innermost essence of the human being is none other than the transcendent essence of God. So this also extends, as I said, to non-theistic traditions. Here's an example from Jesus, who says, whoever sees me has seen the Father. We have the Buddha saying essentially the same thing. Whoever sees the Dharma sees me. Whoever sees me sees the Dharma. Now, how are we to understand these universals? And in particular, how can the finite human being become one with the infinite? And this is where science, I think, can shed some light. And this is the proclamation, as you understand, with Jesus, with Al-Hallaj, that declaring this publicly was very dangerous over history. It tended to get you executed for blasphemy. So, but science can show us how the infinite can be contained within the finite human being. There's a new theme emerging in many disciplines of science, which is that there's more going on than appears to the eyes of the flesh and to the readings of the scientific instruments, that something is going on behind the scenes. As David Bohm put it, the physicist David Bohm, the cosmos is a single unbroken wholeness in flowing movement in which each part of the flow contains the entire flow. So this is a scientific articulation of this oneness, this wholeness, this tawheed in Islam, which means the one or becoming one, or Advaita in Hinduism. So the key insight, one of the key insights that's emerging from modern physics, which is my background, by the way, is that reality has what's called a fractal structure, and this is articulated in something called the holographic principle. And the simplest example of this is called the Mandelbrot Set. Now here's the equation for it. Don't worry if you don't understand any mathematics. All you need is just an eye for beauty, and you'll be able to follow this. But if you take this little equation right here and you plot the graph, you remember like when you were taking high school algebra and you plot the graph of y equals x squared and you get this beautiful parabola. This is the same idea. It's a nonlinear iterative equation in the complex plane, and when you plot it out, this is the graph you get. And this is called the Mandelbrot Set, and it's just a mathematical object, but let me show you something very interesting about this. If we zoom in here at the top, and we get this, and we just keep zooming in, so right now we're probably about 100 times magnified right at the tip, and we'll just zoom in right there at the center, and we get this, and then that oblong in the center there, and we get this, and then that little cross that you can see there in the center, we get this. Now we're at about 1 million times magnified. We're just zooming in. We're just having a look at what is this mathematical graph. You see that star in the center. If we zoom in on that, we get this. And if you see that little black dot in the center, we zoom in, and voila. We find the original figure recreated. So this is 136 million times smaller than the original. And so what we find is that the entire intricacy and complexity of the original is contained in this miniature replica, hundreds of millions of times smaller. Now, this is called self-similar structures in science and physics, or scale invariance. And these kinds of patterns we see throughout nature. I would suggest this is a modern scientific discovery of the ancient principle of correspondence from the Hermetic corpus and tradition, as above, so below, as within, so without. The microcosm replicates the macrocosm. So here's some examples from nature. You can see this same pattern where here's a fern and one leaf of the fern looks like a miniature fern, has the exact same structure. Similarly with broccoli, I have to stand back here because this computer's not receiving the signals from this thing. I'm blocking it. So this is a Romanesque broccoli. And notice how beautiful it is. And one of these nodules is basically a miniature replica of the whole thing. And each one of these tiny little nodules is also a replica. So you have this self-similar structures at every scale. Similarly, tree branches. If you take this branch right here and you cut it off and look at it by itself, this becomes like the trunk, and these are the branches. And so you have this self-similar structure throughout nature. Here's another example. Lightning has a fractal structure. This is the human eye. There's the pupil, the iris, and these are the blood vessels in the human eye. The whole circulation system has a fractal structure, as does the trachea and the lungs. And here's an example of a brain cell and the universe. A scale here is a few microns, a scale here is billions of light years, and there's a close structural similarity. So this idea of as above, so below, we find throughout nature. Now what I want to suggest is that consciousness also has the same property. As Rumi says, do not think the drop alone becomes the ocean too becomes the drop. This is really important to understand about spiritual consciousness and the deepest truth of who we are. We are not just a drop from the infinite ocean. We are the infinite ocean contained in a single drop. This is the key insight. And so the infinity of divinity is contained within the finite human being. Now here's a graph that hopefully, what just happened? Okay, now you're going to watch this process. This is this fractal. It's going to go fast, so this is taking a zoom. Again, what we're looking at is just the mathematical structure. And as we zoom into this thing, what happens is we are going to see that these miniature replicas are going to appear, as we've already seen. And as you watch this, just consider that this, what you're seeing here, is not created by the computer or the software. It's simply plotting a graph. It's contained in the essence of mathematics and numbers. And that these beautiful intricacy in all of this is simply revealing the nature of this mathematical process. And so what you're seeing here is something that existed from the moment of the Big Bang. We didn't actually observe them mathematically until about 30 years ago, when computers became powerful enough to show what's there. But look at this incredible beauty. And as you'll see in a moment, this little fractal is going to emerge. There it is. You see it going up there? So, and then it just keeps going like this. And this movie goes on and on and on. And each one of those little fractals that you saw, each one of them has all of that same infinite structure and complexity contained within it that you're seeing here. And so if consciousness were structured with this principle, then it would explain how the mystics could claim that I have experienced the fullness of infinity of divinity within myself. So here's the mathematical process. We have the mathematical infinite, we have this equation, and we get this mathematical object we just saw. And there's a direct parallel then between the Godhead and the creation, where there is a principle of divinity through which this effuses and then comes into creation, very similar to the mathematical process. And what this gives rise to is an understanding of the superstructure of religions ontologically, where we have essentially the absolute Godhead, which goes by all these different names in the different traditions, and then on the plane of divinity, we have these different structures of light, really, structures of divine light, whether it's the Hindu Trinity, the Christian Trinity, whatever it is, and then down on the plane of creation, each one of these, this kind of infinite, is refracted into a different kind of ray of light that becomes a particular religion. And each of the religions, in that way, are valid pathways up into realizing the divine plane and then up into realizing the absolute Godhead. Now, there's another piece I want to speak to briefly, which is that right at the beginning of Genesis, very important, God speaks in the plural and says, let us create humanity in our image after our likeness. So God created human beings in the image of God, male and female. So what this means, if it's taken literally, even slightly literally, is that God is half female. Of course, that's inaccurate. You can't just say God is anything, but that's less inaccurate than to say that God is all male or all female. And this has been quite developed by the Russian sophiologists. And just briefly mentioning that this Trinity is only half the story then. And if we turn this around, so we have Father, Holy Spirit, and Son in this way. That's the traditional Trinity. And then what the Sophiologists are adding to this is God as Mother, the Holy Soul or the Shekinah, and then Sophia. Sophia then is basically the daughter of the Divine Mother. And Sophia incarnates as Mary, and we had Christ incarnating as Jesus. So when we put these together, we get this kind of structure. And this is the Star of David, if you will, and it's sort of the interior essence of the Kabbalistic understanding. So this is another formulation of it. And this is, of course, spoken to in the Hindu tradition, in the Sri Yantra. This is an example in the Hindu tradition also of how the masculine and feminine come together. And this kind of parity and symmetry of masculine and feminine then merges into one being, which is half male and half female. And this also has its structure. I'm going to skip this slide, which is also in a fractal-like structure. So the masculine and feminine energies are polarized and are basically manifest at every level of the universe. And then on each plane of the universe, we have that kind of proceeding in that way. So this gives a sense of the spirituality of how we're basically trying to reclaim the fullness of God by reclaiming the feminine side of God. So I want to show you one more piece here, which is the energy, the essence of God. And then we have across the religions, we have the different proclamations about the darkness becoming the primal darkness that arose from the oceans. And then God said, "Let there be light." And that separated the light from the darkness. And so then what we have is this became this, where the light came down, and this then created essentially divinity, which we could call spiritual momentum, if you will. And then God said, "Let there be a firmament that separates the waters from the waters." And then what happened was this then became this. And so here we have the uncreated light creating the heavenly realm, and then we have the created light creating the manifest realm. So this comes from the essence of God, divided in by light twice, creates the manifestation. And so this then gives us a form of Einstein's famous equation, where the manifestation is E over c squared. And then these are the different stages of this process. So I need to close now, but thank you very much for your time, and look forward to the questions. Thank you.